Yes, Ninian Smart was a very interesting character. He started out as a philosophy student, and then the Second World War came along. And so he was drafted into the British Army and went into intelligence and was sent out to Sri Lanka, which then was called Ceylon. And there he had a batman who was a Ceylonese, and he had to keep a watch on the local population. I mean, you know, were the Japanese going to penetrate India and Sri Lanka? Were they going to cause a revolt? And so British intelligence needed to know about it. So this was one of Ninian's jobs. And traveling around, he saw Hindu temples and Buddhist temples and things, and he talked to the people, and he became fascinated by their religion. So after the war, he started to study not only philosophy, he completed his studies, and he studied Indian languages, and he became engaged with the study of religion as a philosopher. And then in the 1960s, you had a large influx of Indian people to Britain from the Commonwealth as immigrants. And in England, the only compulsory subject in school since the 1944 Education Act was religion. No other subject was compulsory. You needn't do maths, you needn't do reading and writing, but you had to do religion. This was built into the curriculum. Now, why that is, I'll let you work out for yourself, but that was put into the Act. And so everybody had got to do religion, and religion meant Christianity. That was the assumption in 1944 when it was put forward. And then we had these immigrants coming into England. And of course, you had now Muslims and Hindus going into school and sitting in classes where they had to learn about Christianity and nothing else. There was no other religions around. And so this created something of a problem. People realized that in some areas, particularly Birmingham places, there was a need for a broader curriculum. You had to engage the students because from primary school up, you had classes where most of the kids were either Hindu or Muslim and very few Christians. And yet, when the religion class was taught, it was all Christianity. Well, of course, a lot of the parents didn't like that very much as well. So Ninian put together a project to introduce the teaching of world religions into schools. And he also then, in 1967, became the first professor of religious studies in Britain. Now, before that, they'd had comparative religion in theology faculties, but this was a department of religious studies looking at world religions, and largely to prepare people for the new society that was emerging in Britain. Now, I entered Lancaster in 1967. I was one of the first students in the programme, the first year of the programme, and along with my other students, fellow students, we had, I think, 4 policemen who had been sent there to learn about world religions because they were coming from high immigration areas. And, you know, there were all sorts of problems coming up which people didn't know how to respond to. So they were sent off, and some social workers were sent to learn about religion, and school teachers, of course. And so this was the basis of the original religious studies program, to try and address a real social need that was coming up in Britain. I think in North America we're facing a similar situation now. It's more delayed in terms of the impact of immigration. I think it's only really beginning to hit the United States now, whereas in Britain it was hitting it in the mid-60s. So Ninian put together the religious studies program and did an extremely good job. He was also very active in the American Academy of Religion and eventually moved to Santa Barbara, where he taught for many years. And so he was one of the founding fathers of religious studies. He was a fascinating character. As I say, he had all sorts of tales about being in Sri Lanka during the war and so on. He was also a very devout Christian, although this wasn't obvious. You know, when I went through the religious studies program at Lancaster in our first year, I think half of our class, apart from the policemen and those other people, the other half were all evangelical Christians who decided to take this new course on religion and got into all sorts of arguments with Ninian and one of the other professors, particularly Bob Morgan, who was the New Testament man, and he eventually went to Oxford. But Ninian put together a department where he tried as far as possible to get people who believed in the thing they were teaching, held strong religious beliefs, but he made it diverse by having people who had conflicting beliefs. So he hired Bob Morgan, who was an ultra-liberal. He was a Bultmanian, and we sometimes said as students a Bultmaniac. And on the other hand, he hired David Catchpole, who was an evangelical New Testament scholar. So you had these two extremes in the same department. And he hired people, he hired a Muslim, James Dickey, or Yaqub Zaki, that was his Islamic name, to teach Islam. And this was the way he tried to do it. And for Buddhism, we were very fortunate that Edward Conzer came to Lancaster for a while and taught Buddhism. So this was a fascinating department and a very exciting time in the development of religious studies.